unfortunately, what happened to me was this peak that started to level and had two ways to go. It could have kept going up, or it could have started going down, was when the WWF bought the WCW. And I didn't know it at the time, and I needed some advice from a Sting, a Luger. The problem was they were in deep with me also. But I needed some advice from somebody, and there was nobody there of, this is a big time for you, and you need to kick out. But there was no kicking out. I was all the way in. And again, I was leaning on getting warned. I was leaning on getting this, except that didn't happen. I got fired. And I was like, wait a second, what happened? So if there would have been a warning or anything, I would have probably kicked out. But there was no warning. There was just, like I said, main event 1 week. Jim called me up and said, hey, you're good to go. We'll see you in Atlanta. I show up in Atlanta, and it was, they said I'm getting released, but I knew I was getting fired. But, it was over. So that's when it happened to me. Was I had a big chance to really start over at WWF. I look at The Miz every time I see The Miz. That should be Marcus Bagwell. What? I could have been the guy with 25 years at the WWF, WWE, and been making a living this whole time. Very easy if I just wouldn't have done that. And, if it's and nuts or candies and butts, your every day would be Christmas. But, so I get it. But still, that is the time. Right in 2001, when the WWF came in and bought us, was the time for me to excel and kick out, or to fall in, and I didn't have the chance, and I fell in.
So for context now, when you say Jim, you're talking about Jim Ross, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Who's the head of talent relations at that time, who
yes.
you knew from WCW, I'm sure.
Yep.
All right. And you're mentioning, if you had been warned, what would that warning have consisted of? What warning would have resonated with you at that point?
Well, like, who gets fired, even if it was true, over a bad match? The match that I saw, there was not one mistake in it. It was, it may not have psychology.
Man. It's not that bad. No.
It may not have been psychology a good match, but who the hell gets fired over a psychology bad match? If that was the case, there'd be 10 people fired every night. So it was no warning of like, hey, Bagwell, that was a bad match. Any more bad matches, you're fired. Hey, Bagwell, your mom called. She calls again, you're fired. I didn't get any kind of, I didn't know. I was blown away when I walked in that room, and Jim Ross and Johnny Ace and Jim and Vince McMahon were in that room that day. I was blown away. I was like, oh my God, I'm getting fired. Keep in mind, I never had a job to get fired from. And I had to raise my hand. And Vince goes, you don't got to raise your hand, Mark. I said, I feel like I must. You're telling me I'm getting released. What's the difference of getting released and fired? And they had a difference. They said, if we released you, we can bring you back in 3 months. And if we fire you, we can't. So they were trying to make released better. So I'm still not getting warned. I'm still getting lied to. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm not fired. I'm coming back in 3 months. But really, I'm going, there's no way that's possible. So I asked the question again, and Vince goes, you don't got to raise your hand. And I said, so I asked another question, and I could just tell it was over, and there was nothing I could do about it. There was no, I wasn't like looking for a warning. I just hadn't gotten trouble. So how do you get fired without there's got to be a little bit of fire before, a little smoke before there's fire. There was smoke, but I didn't see it.
All right. So there's somebody somewhere has some rationale behind this. It very possibly makes no sense at all. So
right.
let's assume, let's just take the leap and say you were absolutely unjustly released. What does that, first of all, now I want to ask this question. Maybe you haven't been asked this one before. How do you look at that now? Do you have any remaining bitterness over that now? Is it just something that happened to a different version of you and you've moved on? How do you look at that at this point in your life?
Man, to be honest with you, I think about them listening to me right now and them going, Bagwell, get over this. It's 23 years old, bro. Are you kidding? But we're talking about it and I don't know what else to say except the truth. And the truth is Jim Ross lied. Jim Ross called me up and he said, and here's the problem with it. Jim, me, and God only know what happened that day. And God ain't going to come on this podcast to tell us. And in the world of wrestling, Jim Ross is going to be believed much more over a Buff Bagwell. And I get that. But what truly happened is Jim called me up after the Booker T match and said, hey, we got big plans for you in Atlanta. We want you to take off these house shows. We'll see you in Atlanta. Get ready. Man, I was fired up all week. I was in the gym. I was tanning. I show up in Atlanta and I get fired. And the story is my mother called to get me out of those towns, which isn't true. And the bad match is the reason they fired me. And again, I watched the match back and was like, what are they talking about? It ain't like a barn burner, but it wasn't bad. So yes, I have a truckload of animosity over it because it cost me millions.